Good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Syme, your guest host for this edition of Higher Ed Live. During the day, I run a consulting agency that specializes in digital crisis communications and social media marketing. It's called cksyme.org, and you can find me on the web at www.cksyme.org. I'm excited to be your guest host tonight and to introduce you to my guest and longtime friend, Dr. Bill Smith, as we take a look at what we're going to call Crisis 2.0, and we'll define that tonight as a new model of communications that takes into consideration the speed of digital and the need that the public has to have 24/7 information. We're glad you're with us today. Thanks for joining the conversation as we look at how you can use social media to protect your reputation and build advocacy for your institution. Just please be sure to follow along on Twitter and at Higher Ed Live, and you can follow me at CK Syme and Dr. BS at Dr._BS. Isn't that a great Twitter handle? I love your Twitter handle, Bill. It's one of my favorites. On tonight's show, our name of our show is Crisis 2.0, using social media to build advocacy and protect your reputation. But before we start tonight, just like to mention a word from our sponsors for tonight's show. Omni Update is the leading web content management system provider for higher education. The company's web CMS, called OU Campus, is secure and scalable with great tools and features, deployment flexibility, and an awesome user community. In fact, it was the highest ranked CMS in customer satisfaction in a 2010 .edu Guru survey. So if you need a CMS, check them out at omniupdate.com. Also, Higher Ed Live sponsor is also Integral, the creators of the Schools app. It's a private Facebook community to boost enrollment and retention. Check out their blog at Integral Insights for posts on admissions, marketing, student engagement, and the use of social media in higher education. We're tweeting the link to that blog right now. So before we get going tonight into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be talking about, I'd like to introduce to you a longtime friend, Dr. Bill Smith. Bill is the director right now of University Branding and Marketing at Northwestern State in Louisiana. Bill and I know each other from sports information days. We're both former SIDs. And I'd like to give Bill a chance to introduce himself right now and tell you a little bit about his background and his present position.
Well, thanks for inviting me on tonight, Chris. Here in Natchitoches, Louisiana, I've kind of transitioned over into a role in which I'm the Director of Marketing and Branding, as you indicated, and in charge of the entire institution now. So a lot of what I do is bring the tools and the skills that I learned in the that 24/7 world of high-level, high-risk college athletics over to the university side. And there's a lot of translatable skill set there. You quickly learn when you're in BCS level athletics that your reputation is everything, and monitoring that across all sorts of platforms, through social media, through participatory media, which I think people sometimes forget when they think of social media. That's the message boards and those traditional old school ways of communicating with others peer to peer. And that monitoring is something that we all have to be aware of. It's gotten to be a little bit of a nasty phrase lately, especially in the athletic world, where monitoring is somehow seen as some sort of First Amendment snooping. It really is a matter of you want to be in the room, and sometimes the room is literally a discussion in a coffee house on your campus. But that room can also be Facebook or Twitter or any of the many different social media products that are out there. I know you like to avoid using brand name, essentially. It was 5 or 6 years ago. We're still worried about MySpace. Who knows if we'll be worrying about Facebook 5 or 10 years from now. But we will continue to be talking about the concept of social interaction through the network. That's really what's changed. We're all networked together. And just like tonight, I'm here in Natchitoches. You're there out on the West Coast. And that time and space is really gone now for us. So when, in the past we all got taught in PR classes about worrying about the golden hour and and it was a really cute phrase, that's real today if you're not reacting in that first hour to an event.
Right. Let's start out tonight, Bill, by just giving our audience a little bit of an understanding when we say that phrase Crisis 2.0. I'd like to kind of explain to you a little bit about what that looks like. Some of you may be familiar with the business kind of speak that we have today about the difference between doing social and being social. And Crisis 2.0 really has to do with social organizations or social business, being social. And the difference kind of between old crisis management practices that I learned in basically is that we didn't have this 24/7 news cycle. We were able to set aside time, prepare our messages, get them out there. But now what's happened with digital is we have this need not only to be quick, but also to give a message that is more consumer side oriented and less corporate side oriented. So when we talk about being social, we talk about building advocates, and that's kind of what Crisis 2.0 is about. It's about two things, basically. It's about identifying influencers and advocates and empowering them. And also, it's about using value-added strategies for social media. In other words, when we talk about Crisis 2.0 social media strategy, we're really just talking about the best practices of business social media strategy, so we don't get those confused. Crisis 2.0, we don't want to have crisis as a standalone function in the institution. It needs to be integrated with the way you use social media now, and I'll tell you why that's important real quick, and then we'll get into kind of the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about. I've dealt with a lot of people that they have a crisis and all of a sudden they're worried about, oh, how are we going to use social media? And I'm like, well, you should already be using social media. Then you wouldn't have to answer that question. So what we're talking about is we're talking about a strategic system, if you will, where you build advocacy using social media 365 days a year. And when you build that advocacy, then when you have a negative event or a crisis event or an embarrassing moment, as we'll talk about later, kind of the difference between those, you'll have this built-in core of people that are already on your side that'll come to your side. So that when we talk about Crisis 2.0, it's that new paradigm of social media infiltrating every area of the institution, not just the communications office. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And so when we talk about social media integrated into all operations of an organization and not just communications, that we talk about it as a strategy, Bill, and not so much a tactic. So give us an idea. Tell us a little bit about how you integrate social media across all your marketing and branding objectives there at Northwestern State.
You know, Chris, you touched a little bit on it in your intro here. You've got to act social. It's not something that you can pick up one day and just decide to do. And we have to keep in mind, especially in the higher ed community, the primary audience for a lot of what we do, they're born digital. This is their native world. A new buzzword that I'm hearing a lot is born mobile, which, you know, another tweak to that we probably need to consider. But, you know, in the golden age of broadcasting back in the 20th century, we'd talk one to many. And that's the way a lot of our crisis communication was done. Now we've got to get buy-in from groups, and we've got to get them to participate with us. And here's the other part of that. They're going to participate whether you're there or not. I think this is a really important thing to discuss when you're just thinking about crisis in general and then adding the social. Stop for a minute and think about what a crisis is. Technically, this is anything that disrupts your normal flow of business. A crisis can be a snowstorm that comes in and closes campus. A crisis can be a hurricane closure in advance of bad weather. And a crisis can be an embarrassment. Now, this is what a lot of people think of. Something bad's happened. Manti Te'o is a huge one that comes to mind right now. It was a crisis for him and for his institution. But at the end of the day, no one died, including his imaginary girlfriend. So those kind of crises are not at the level of, say, life safety crisis. These are the kind of events that hopefully no one has to deal with. Thankfully, they're rare. But when the communication becomes life and death, you know, this matrix of how you deal with people and how you communicate in a social setting ratchets up to a level that makes every step magnified and every potential mistake very life-threatening. So I mentioned that spectrum of crisis to say this. One of the most important things we've done here at Northwestern is we try to practice our crisis management every day. Your normal business activity can be leading to crisis. And if you practice what you need when things get tough, it'll come naturally to you.
Let's talk a little bit, Bill, about how that fleshes out. When I mean that, we talk about integrating social media across all of our operations. What kind of additional training burden does that put on a social media manager?
Well, the first thing you've got to do is find more than the social media manager to handle this, because as surely as we talk about this being a social interaction between groups, you're back to trying to be one-to-many when you've got a single manager. Here at Northwestern, we've recruited some folks that we call our social media committee. They were the people that helped us create our policies and procedures. We meet each week and discuss problems and challenges, but they're also part of our monitoring and response team, so that when we have an event that takes place, and I'll use an example we've had here at our institution, we like to talk about being a student-centered school. It's in our mission statement. But this fall, we implemented a new student record system. This is a crisis of a different kind. We had some hiccups in how that rolled out. A lot of students were having difficulty reaching parts of campus. They were having some difficulty getting refunds in the time that they were accustomed to. And they were coming to us on Facebook and letting us know about it, and a little bit on Twitter as well. So this was an opportunity for us to use that team to find the information that needed to be sent to the students, to listen to the students, and bring their information back to decision makers that needed to hear that within the institution, and have that exchange. You've got to build in social as a part of all your communications plans now. Most universities have a crisis communications plan that is the formal FEMA Department of Homeland Security type document. That document needs to be examined tomorrow. If you've got any takeaway from our discussion tonight, go see if social media monitoring, social media interaction is in that media plan, or is it still based on, here's the phone list that we're going to call the local media with, here's the email list of the traditional network stations that will get our message out on TV, or do you have that ability to do the exchange in social with that same crisis information?
Right, that's a lot of that is some of that old school crisis comms procedures we talked about earlier. One of the things that I did last year when I put my ebook together, Listen, Engage, Respond, is we talked about the importance of monitoring as a everyday function in a university. It's interesting because some of the people that have contacted me in crisis are universities that are not set up to monitor, but they realize the importance of it. And it's not that I get a kick out of this, it's just that I know that they're smart enough to call and say, hey, we don't have anybody to listen, but we know that we need somebody, so, you know, it's something that I would consider the utmost importance is you can't do social media. I don't know if you can actually do social media without the listening piece. It just becomes a noisy broadcast, and you have no idea what people are saying. To me, it's pretty dangerous. So I agree with you that I think monitoring is key, and you need to have somebody on staff that monitors, and it can be as simple as putting up a Hootsuite, you know, or TweetDeck, or, you know, putting up a few Google alerts and then just checking them, you know, 3 times a day just to make sure that you know what's going on. So let's kind of segue into that a little bit to talk about, okay, you're listening, Bill, and you notice that there's something going on, pocket of conversation about an event that happened on your campus, and it's not good chatter, it's negative chatter. Tell me, what kind of procedure are you going to go through to decide whether or not you should respond to that?
I think this goes back to what each institution has in the way of a social media policy. And if you don't have one, you really need to get one, if for no other reason than this particular issue. We have a matrix that we go through when there's an issue to decide whether it's going to be a response directly, it's going to be a response offline. And we're very clear about our policies on certain things: lewd, racial, bullying behavior, inappropriate content. We have the right to take that down. That's not a matter of trying to stifle anybody's First Amendment. We simply are saying these are things that are not acceptable in our social community. When I was back at the University of Arkansas, we would deal with folks in interactive chat the same way when I would say to them this: look, do you think that your foul language because you're behind a screen name is okay here in this space, but if you were sitting in the football stadium, don't you expect the usher would have walked you out if you had been dropping those words and making those gestures? So it's a matter of trying to keep community going. But once you get past that and somebody that might just be trolling, to use the term, generally you've got people, if they've taken the time to get on your social media platform and tell you about a problem on your campus, you need to listen to that, because someone has put their name and their face out there to say, I think you need to pay attention to this. We spend a lot of time in that way listening. You know, you can use Radian 6 and you can use all these big high-end expensive programs. You can use free tools. To me, the essential part is the people. It's got to be more than one person, and it's got to be people connecting to different parts of campus. It's a social network again. You've got to build your group up that can listen, because as you've mentioned, it's a 24/7 world on social. No one person's going to be able to hear it all. Get that team together, get them some training, and then begin to start listening and responding.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we respond. We had an incident in a university that I was connected to earlier this year where they had brought in a convocation speaker that was politically controversial, and so one of the professors in the history department decided that they were going to write a rather scathing letter to the editor about how the school had misappropriated funds to bring in this speaker for convocation, and it became just a little bit, and again, the word crisis to me is reserved for something that's really a crisis. This is like a negative event. Okay, and it's more of an embarrassment really than anything, because hey, we live in a world of free speech. How do you at the university level decide when or even if you're going to intervene in this conversation?
I think the key is that you have to have your policy down and your matrix down, and if this individual is expressing their opinion and doing it within the bounds that you've defined, listen, respect what they have to say. Respond if you have a factual error that you can help correct.
There you go.
The key in social is respecting other people's opinion. You want your opinion to carry forward, you're going to have to listen to theirs. And if they bring it to your official presence on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, wherever it is, understand that this is the way the world works now. The born digital generation anticipates a mix of opinion. That's hard to explain sometimes to folks that aren't accustomed to it, because here's the alternative. We've had a situation here in the region where a television station had its response policy that they said nothing. They would remove nothing, they would say nothing to crisis that would happen on their Facebook page. And for a week and a half, they were taken over by a rolling, continuous attack that they inadvertently fueled by their lack of engagement. These folks were not going to go away. And they were going to continue to post and continue to post until somebody answered them. And once they got honored to answer them, it faded away and it was allowed to slip down the timeline and it was gone. You can find it in a Google search or a graph search, as that's coming out now on Facebook. But if you let these things fester by the lack of engagement, they can often be far worse than the, temporary embarrassment that inappropriate or an unwelcome set of comments might be.
Right. I'm reminded of a case study that I saw a couple of years ago at the Case Social Media Conference. It was a really great example of tempering response. They had a student organization raising money at this particular school, and there was a little bit of pressure for outgoing seniors to make a donation to the school's alumni fund. It was a competition, actually, and it came out in the course of this campaign that some seniors did not give. And so the school paper published their names. And it became a little bit of a deal only because it got picked up by some bloggers on the East Coast who were monitoring school papers. And so the school had to make a decision as to whether or not they were going to say something. You know, we're all wringing our hands and biting our fingernails, wondering if it's going to get on Huffington Post or something like that. And I appreciated the wisdom of this social media manager, because he said, I told the leadership, let's just watch it for a couple of days and see what happens. And he watched it for a couple of days, and there was a blog here and another one, and then a week later there was a few comments here and there random on the internet. But the thing never actually blew up or got made into anything, so they just let it ride. And sometimes I think the opposite side of what you're talking about is the people that ignore completely in the face of when you need to get engaged. The opposite side of that is people who jump in too early. And I think we really need some wisdom here. The one thing where I really see a lot of organizations and institutions especially going amiss is we have to answer everything. And one of my biggest mantras is everything doesn't need an answer. You know, some comments just have to slide. I like your comment, Bill, about the fact that it causes discomfort. I think sometimes that's a generational thing too. With our generation, is we don't like to hear people talking about us in the public space because, hey, you never used to have a public space. But I think that the culture comes to expect the fact that they can give their opinion, and they have to be able to give it respectfully, because I'm all for, you know, posting policies and that kind of thing. I think we need to pay attention to that. So last year, we had this opportunity to do, I actually did was in on a couple of research surveys that explored this idea of using social media in a crisis. And what was really cool was that as a result of these surveys, there were 5 takeaways that were the same with both groups. And it was 2 different groups, but they were in higher ed. And so I think we'll just run through these real quick, and you can kind of give me your take on how you guys handle this down in Northwestern State. But I think the first one was, these are 5 must-haves for every institution to be able to do crisis communications today. And the first one is a social media policy. So tell me a little bit, was there one in place when you came on board? And if not, how did you go through that process? And if there was one in place, what was your process for reviewing it and taking a look at
it? Here at Northwestern State, they had started the process of creating something, but it was in a very, very preliminary stage. I had had the opportunity to draft these for the 2 previous institutions I had been at, so I brought a lot of that knowledge along to the table. But here I did something different. After kind of getting a sense of the culture here, we knew that we needed a 2-stage policy. And I'm really thinking that this is an approach that might be very advantageous for many institutions. We have a set of guidelines, and we have a policy. And it's as simple as this. Guidelines are best practices, the absolutes that will get you arrested or in trouble with your individual states. I'll use an example here. In our policy, we talk about endorsement and inadvertent endorsement, and the release of contractual material. Those happen to be relating to state of Louisiana, but every state's going to have a different sort of thing there, where you touch this rail, you're going to get in civil trouble, not just social media trouble. And we included those in the guidelines. The idea was to put something out there for faculty, students, and staff so they would know, hey, maybe I should think about the fact that people are watching what I say, that students in particular have a power relationship with their faculty member that faculty members don't often think about. You know, asking a student to friend you, is that going to say to that student that you are now going to sort of, you know, give them a preferential treatment in the class? Are you now the class pet? If a student is not wanting to share with you, will the student be intimidated into thinking they should be a friend of yours on Facebook? Because if they don't, they're going to face some sort of thing. So addressing that power relationship was in those guidelines as well. We have a set of policies, however, for those that represent the institution. These are very clear-cut. Anybody that is going to speak on behalf of an academic unit, speak on behalf of an auxiliary unit, is going to use the trademarks and logos of the institution, have to follow these guidelines, these policies. They are much more, many would say, restrictive. But if you're speaking on behalf of us, we want you to make sure that you are carrying the right information forward and providing the institution with certain security functions. By this, we inherited dozens of dead feeds at Northwestern State. Some of them with names that we'd really like to use on Facebook, but because that student or that faculty member had left, they're now dormant. We can't access them. We can't log into them. We can't shut them down and move them. We can't correct them. We can't restart them. There were some we really would like to restart, but those folks have just disappeared into the ether. So now we require anybody that's operating in our social media network, that's operating under the policies, to have at least 2 institutional members, full-time staff, in the area in case one's out of town. They've got a backup. If there's a need to reach someone, there's that. And then 2 members of the university staff, myself, and then a designated person in the news bureau. Again, it's not for monitoring. We're very clear about that. We're really not caring about what you post on the Department of English Facebook page, but we do want to be able to get in there and say, fix something if it gets hacked, or if the English department folks are out of town at a conference and something great happens and they want someone to put on their Facebook page, they can't access it, we can help them with it. So we've gone with that 2-stage policy, and it has worked remarkably well here.
And we're really talking about what you talked about earlier about building a social media team campus-wide so that there's more of a cooperative kind of, I saw an interesting dynamic at Texas, I think it's A&M. I did a piece for Case on it, and they actually have a liaison there, which you'll be interested in this, between the main campus communications office and the athletic department, who can post both ways on all social media accounts in both places. And I thought that was an interesting cooperation because you and I know that that's traditionally a place where there's a lot of silos built between athletics and campus communications. And it was good to see that there were bigger schools that were starting to understand the benefits of having a whole wheel full of spokes rather than just one central location where everything is done, because then you do tend to build your little silos in your department. I'm interested to talk about this kind of verification process, so let's come back to that. Another thing that we found in the takeaways on the research we talked about a little bit is the idea of monitoring, listening to the chatter of what's going on out there. Can you give me an idea, maybe logistically, just how you're monitoring, what tools you're using, and what you're looking for?
You know, we use a lot of the basic tools that are free. TweetDeck's a favorite of mine. Well, it was on the computer behind me. It went to sleep. You know, and we've got 3 or 4 people that alternate keeping an eye on that. Also, we have distributed our Facebook pages among the different areas on campus. You mentioned athletics. They are also inside the fence with us here. We have a unified command in that sense. And I think what you're seeing is that's a new trend nationwide. LSU has merged their athletic and their university communications under one coordinator. So we try to use the multiple ability of having lots of folks involved. So I might get an email in the middle of the night from one of our people that works in the library. Hey, I saw this. You might want to be ready for it in the morning. I'll see something that's out there about athletics. I'll send it over to the Sports Information Office. Hey, this afternoon you might want to pay attention to this. And it's about that collaborative work where we're all looking at the same stuff and backing each other up.
Bill, what do you think is the value of actually cross-posting information on your social media channels? For instance, using your university webpage to talk about athletics and using your athletics social media channels to talk about the greater university goals.
Oh, I think it's absolutely essential, and we do that all the time. Here in Natchitoches, we're a small community, about 18,000, and about another 18,000 in our immediate parish. So we're somewhat rural and small numbers. So our Twitter is nowhere near as robust as, say, when I left the University of Arkansas, and Ark Razorbacks as a Twitter feed was huge and state and nationwide. So we spend a lot of our time inside of Facebook. I say that to point out that we do a lot of things where the Louisiana Scholars College is a unit of our institution. It's an honors college that exists inside our college. So they obviously have a separate feed. Events will happen at Scholars College that they'll post that I'll pick up and take to the front page of the university, and then perhaps we'll move over to the Department of English who might be interested in it. This past weekend we had a unique opportunity in athletics where we had the #1 scoring offense in Division I. Stephen F. Austin was bringing the #1 scoring defense in Division I. So athletics was promoting that. We changed our Facebook page to promote it. We used it on our university website as well to drive folks in this small community to come take a look at something in athletics. When we have our creative and performing arts events, we'll use athletics to help promote that there is a major band competition coming up as well. There's a great synergy to be had, and it just shows to the community that you're one family, and that's a big thing that you need to promote these days in higher ed.
Right, and I think this also works very well with our understanding of what Crisis 2.0 is that idea of building advocates. You know, we have a lot of research out there today, people, that tells us that if you have a large core or even a small core of very dedicated, invested, loyal people on social media, they can really come to your side during a crisis or during a negative event. And I've seen it happen. It's just amazing. As a matter of fact, I did a case study on Penn State's situation when that broke here in the past, and I was amazed at how invested loyal Penn State fans came to school's rescue on their social media channels. They've done a great job of building advocacy over the years there, and it really counts a lot. And I've even seen studies that talk about how it impacts your bottom line. You know, because crisis costs money. You know, no school wants to have that, you know, bottom line. So let's go back to talking a little bit about monitoring, Bill, from a crisis standpoint. Are there any particular things that hot button issues or anything that you're looking for on there that might signal that you need to take a closer look or keep an eye on something?
I think you have to just read the pulse of your community. It will shift back and forth. I mentioned earlier, you know, that we made the change in our student record system. So we knew that that was going to be an ongoing process. It always is on any campus, and you just listen for that. When you see a student pop up and saying, hey, I'm having trouble with this part of that new system, you want to reach out to them as quickly as you can and say, tell me more. Please email me those details, because just as a reminder, you don't want to be putting your potentially FERPA violating information out here on public on Facebook. Email me over here. Let me help you. So you just listen for those, and then you watch for the obvious. You know, you have a student post that they've heard, you know, loud noises. Well, is that the precursor of a police call that might be happening, or is somebody having a nice party on campus? You know, you just want to keep an ear to the ground on that. I want to jump in and go back to something you said earlier, though. We've made a conscious effort for this. We call them our social media teams. So each of our members of our committee has been told, I'll use Scholars College again as an example. Davina McLean is our head there of that college, and she's also their representative on the social media. It helps when you have administrators involved in social media. I said, look, you need to reach out to your alums, your community members, and build a social media team. These are folks that are going to watch your feed, listen for you as well, kind of moving downstream, but they're also the ones that take your message and reinforce it. So when she announces an event, they'll retweet and repost and reshare on their feeds to, again, other members of that community that things are going on. I've got a group that are from our Alumni Association, 10 to 15 folks, that if we were going to have a crisis, and this is how I'd use it in the 2.0 sense, if we knew we were about to have to announce something, I'd reach out to them either hours or a day before, depending on what the embargo situations are, and say, look, here's what's about to happen. We want you to be out there helping us get the message out. Here are the points that we need to emphasize. We hope that you are on board with us. If you've got a problem, let us know now. But it's, again, creating a team of folks that can do for you in a very conscious way. What you were describing happened organically at Penn State, and it'll happen among your folks. But if you can get your power Facebook, power Twitter, really involved social media folks engaged with you, they will be the ones that step up and defend you. You won't have to, as you said, respond to every question. They'll respond to a lot of them for you.
Right. And usually they have the best information because they're paying attention.
Well, and it means more because they're not the institution doing the answering.
Right. And on this same line, we talk about monitoring a little bit. You've mentioned TweetDeck. I mentioned Hootsuite. We've talked about Radian6. There's a lot of tools for listening out there, and a lot of those tools also allow you to post. So one of the other takeaways that we got from our research was that everybody should have a social media management system of some kind. It may or may not include your monitoring tools, but it just makes it convenient in terms of scheduling posts, keeping an eye on everybody's, you know, what they're doing across campus. Do you use a system like you ask people to use a dashboard so that you can train everybody the same, or are your departments on campus kind of on their own for doing their own thing there?
We make some recommendations about software to them. We provide them training. That's another service that we have through our committee and through our branding and marketing office. The one thing that I do try to stress over and over to folks is do not combine your social media feeds. It's good to use a dashboard that allows you to see it all in one area, but one of the worst things you can do is link your Facebook to your Twitter, link your Twitter to your Facebook. They are two very distinctive messages. And the people that follow you, let's cut to a chase here. A lot of what we do is to try to increase recruiting. The born digital generation will smell you in a moment when they see on Twitter, fb.com hashtags, because they know you're using something that's putting a Facebook link on Twitter.
Or if they see a hashtag in a Facebook post, it's
that
the same
too.
deal.
Or worse,
Yeah.
I've seen this happen where someone will not pay attention to the fact that they've only got 120-ish characters to deal with, and they'll write a Facebook post that says, this is literally the way it read. Students, please check your emails today for an important message. That's what went out on Twitter. Cut off in the middle of it. How would you like to be the student on the receiving end of that? You're thinking, oh my gosh, is school closed? Is there a shooter on campus? What's this important message coming to me? That cut off midway through because on Facebook they had 450 characters and it truncated. Here's the worst part. You know what the rest of the message said? Check your student email for the opportunity to do a survey and win an iPad and give us feedback. You know, when students figure that out, that you also bungled it and you messed up this opportunity to get feedback, yeah, you've really got to be conscious of those things. I know a lot of folks that swear it's a time saver. In the end, it will hurt you more than it'll save time.
Right, and just for the record, I agree. I'm not a fan of posting the same message on every venue. It's like, you know, trying to think of it from an advertising perspective. You've got your TV ads, your paper ads, your radio ads. They're all different. You know, you just have to take time to learn that, and it's a challenge, I know, because you know a lot of us are one-man shops in these days, and we don't have a whole lot of time. But when we talk about social media management dashboards in a crisis situation, Bill, can you see a situation where you'd want to put the same messages out on Twitter, Facebook, and all your social medias verbatim during a crisis?
I do think there are opportunities that has to happen. A lot of those are the life safety events. Right. You know, if you're closing a campus because of inclement weather, you do have to be very precise that the same message that comes on the text alert system that, say, your university has, the same email, the same Twitter and Facebook, and in that case, you better make sure you cover your distances. Because here's an example. If the university is going to close at 5 o'clock, does that mean you're closing the gates and everybody goes home? Or did you just cancel classes because there was a inclement weather situation? That precision need does, I think, require you to make sure that you're saying the same thing on different platforms. And it is one of the things that we do have in our guidelines, back to that. The one hard and fast policy is that we have a statement in there about in the event of true emergency, please, you know, get to somebody on campus first. Don't put information out that you are not wholly assured of, because you could inadvertently hurt people. If you know there's a fire on campus and you just say there's a fire on campus and people know you're in this building, you might inadvertently get people running in the direction of the fire rather than off campus because you posted the wrong stuff. So yeah, it's in those life safety situations that I do think you have to be precise and repetitive.
I agree. One of the other components that emerged from the survey research was the idea of, and we touched on this briefly, and I know you and I have some different thoughts on this subject, but I'm going to let you talk, and then we'll see what happens. I am a kind of a proponent of social media, let's call it a registry, and you talked about it a little bit earlier, where we actually have passwords and admins for all the social media accounts on campus, just in case we have an emergency and we need to be able to take down social media or whatever. Talk to me a little bit about how you feel about the idea of registering, trying to get as many of the accounts as you can under one umbrella. Also the idea of branding and how that might want to stretch across your campus, and also the idea of training. kind of all that in sort of a registry affiliation kind of a deal?
Well, that's where we come back to the social media policies we have here. If you're going to use the marks of Northwestern State on your Facebook and represent the university, you will register. I mean, it's just cut and dried. That's the way it's going to be. And that sounds a little draconian, but it is for consistency and for the institution. If you wish to, as Jane Doe and a professor, say what you wish on your Facebook page, that's fine. But when you step in and you're going to be representing Northwestern State, hashtag, right behind me you can see our Facebook address for that reason, you've got to play inside those rules. If you're going to use our logo, we're going to make sure that you use certain logos on your cover art. We're going to make sure that you're not using our retired logos in cover art. We're also going to provide you the training, though, through the social media committee to give you those guidelines and provide resources. I think this is the key. To anyone, if you're not providing them a benefit from these guidelines and the training and the help and the graphic art help and other things that we can provide from our office, why would you want to buy in and help us? It's got to be a two-way street. It's no different from the social exchange that happens on Facebook itself. So we have been very clear about that. If you're going to represent the institution, you're going to register in. You know, I've got access to every official Facebook page we have. They all show up down my side. I've got the same on all the Twitter feeds, and we run them all inside of our tweet deck so we can see them every day. We're here to support. That's what we always try to emphasize. We are a support mechanism for you as a social media manager. We don't want to be in the middle of your business about your messaging all day long. We don't want to edit your stuff. We don't want to get into the into the minutia, but we want to be there to support you. But we also want you to make sure that you're supporting the institution by using the right color scheme, the right logos, etc.
One thing that I've talked with universities too about is that when you're putting your crisis plan together and you're talking about who's going to talk for the university in the event of a crisis, one of the things that I would recommend that institutions do is have you and I have talked about this triage, matrix, whatever you want to call it, kind of a tree of organization that you need to use during a crisis situation. I think that registering all your accounts gives you access to the admins quickly, so that during a crisis, if you have to put out a certain message that you want every single social media channel in the university to put out, you can do so. And so there's some crisis advantages there to doing that, simply because in crisis speed is so important, and we want to get a hold of every channel that we can. I watched Rutgers during Sandy, and I was interested to see that there was a lot of people having side discussions about the storm and the school and things going on side channels that weren't really the main university channel. So it's really important, I think, to address that sort of crisis training with your social media team, and what are we going to do in the event of a crisis kind of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, along with having policies, you've got to practice. That's why I like to use that term of crisis as anything that disrupts your business. Therefore, you know, if you're going to close campus early because of incoming ice storm, let's say, you can practice everything that would happen if that was an active shooter by following through the same steps, so that when you get to those really tough events that are also going to do this, keep in mind, in a Hurricane Sandy situation, we see the hurricanes down here as well, you know, you're going to lose people in the sense that they have to go take care of loved ones, they have to step away and evacuate, and you've got to have redundancy built in. The only way you can drill that redundancy is having the plan and working the plan. A lot of my background is also from volunteer work with FEMA-oriented emergency service, and so I use a lot of that training in this as well, that you've got to make a plan and train the plan. You know, to use another athletic analogy, you're not going to send a kid out to shoot free throws with 1 second left in the game if you haven't been practicing free throws all year long. Same thing happens on social. Just because you've got a born digital student that has an iPad, that doesn't qualify them to be your social media manager, and you can't throw them out there on the island and expect them to handle it. You've got to give them backing, you've got to give them structure, and you have got to practice and drill.
Right, right. Good thoughts, Bill. The last component that we talked about, and I'm going to kind of skip over it because we've already kind of talked it over, is the idea of having a central centralized community manager, not somebody that runs everybody's social media, but somebody that acts as a resource, a trainer, a triage person, if you will, to kind of get everything set up. And I think what we'd like to do at this time probably is maybe take some questions from anybody that's out there that's still listening, that's with us, that has any questions about social media use in crisis, or how to do this and how to do that. I actually have one here that came in earlier, and I'll read it. It's to you, Bill. It says, Bill, can you tell me what you would recommend a school have in place to handle an emergency on campus? Would you recommend text alerts, mass email, or others? And is there a wrong time to use these protocols?
I would tell you the answer is yes, because you've got to have all of them. A very interesting study was done by the University of Buffalo. They presented it at Counselors for Higher Ed for PRSA last year, and they looked at this very question. How do students want to receive the emergency message, and then what type of emergency message causes them to take the appropriate action? You know, if a snowstorm is imminent, what will cause the students to take the right precautions? The fast notes on this is that the text message from the institution seemed to have the highest validity with the surveyed students. However, they wanted the social media interaction for that very reason, interaction. They didn't necessarily trust it because they would ask questions. And I've seen this happen at our own institution. We're closing campus today. Does that mean campus is closed in Shreveport? Yes, all campuses are closed. Does that mean we're closed in Leesville? Yes, all campuses are closed. You said all campuses were closed, but does that mean there's no night class tonight? Yes, there's no night class tonight. Now, that's a certain amount of that social exchange that you end up having to do because people want to ask questions. They want to get extra information. So I think what you have to do is use all of those tools. Many schools have a system that students sign up for. We call it Purple Alert here, where you can, put your phone number in. You can put your cell phone in if you wish to receive text or email. You have to, again, test those systems repeatedly. But I want to go back to a little something you talked about in that registering. Here's the thing that you really have to think about, particularly if you're the social media manager. Who's your contact within the university that's going to give you that assured, verified information? Because you're out there listening, and you're getting questions about, hey, what's up with this student record system? Hey, is the school really closed? Listen, I heard this rumor. You've got to have your contacts set up, be they in the news bureau, the provost office, the dean of student affairs, whatever that chain of command is at your institution. You need to work that out in advance. Because to throw out another one of those PIO lines, you don't want to start exchanging business cards at the crisis. So knowing who you pick up the phone and call, or text, or email to say, I've just picked up this on our Facebook page. Is this true? What's our answer? What's the response? Having that chain established, and that's a human chain. That's not going to come to you through any monitoring system you can buy. It's something that you have to go out and take some time building that relationship and being that person. This also kind of comes back to where social's plugged into your communication plan, but I will tell you, really, in advance, you want to work that out.
Bill, here's another question that I think you'd be a good one to handle because I know you've done this. How important is it to have a dark website set up? For those of you that don't know, I'm sure everybody knows, the dark website is a web homepage or a set of pages that you have built ahead of a crisis that you can just put up right away that has all of your main information on it. Bill, how important is it to have a dark website set up, and when is it appropriate to use it?
I think those are incredible time savers, and I would even take it a step further that you want to have a dark website available for your most obvious emergencies. In our case, we might want to have a dark website that would deal with hurricane closures. They do happen in this area. If you're in the Northeast, you might want to have it for snow events. You also want to have templates ready, just like you would have in the old public relations sense, to save yourself time when it starts happening. Because when it starts happening, it's going to be so fast that you don't need to take time writing the greatest new Hemingway-esque lead. It's the basics. And FEMA is very good about this. I would recommend reach out to your county emergency services folks, your 911 coordinators, and they have probably got on a USB stick this stack of pre-made press releases that FEMA has that they send out with their folks to any crisis. And I mean, it is everything from a fire to a flood to a chemical spill. And if you've got a lot of those basics already down with your phone numbers in, your contact areas, and keep them updated, when you're just plugging it in and then putting that on a dark site, it's going to be a lot faster, and you're going to have quicker response, and you're probably going to have more accurate response. You won't have those unsightly typos that in these days, a typo can be seen as somebody that was a hacker or somebody that was spoofing, that wasn't careful. They expect you as a professional to make no mistakes. And the first indicator that something wrong is the color off? Is the logo wrong? Was that person's name the name we anticipated? Were there spelling errors in the press release? You can solve a lot of that by doing this work ahead of time, and I highly recommend it.
Right, and along with that too, I might mention one of the things that I talk to schools about is having a series of holding messages, they call them, for social media. I make them up for Facebook, for Twitter. I actually made them up for a client here this fall that had a little bit of an online negative event, and they wanted to know, what do we tell our department people if they get asked? I had to make up a whole set of holding messages and sent them out like talking points or bullet points to heads of departments to talk over with their people as well. I think holding messages are good because, like you said, Bill, one of the things that takes over that you never really realize until you have one is emotion. Emotion can change completely the way that you would logically react to a crisis event, especially if it's a life-threatening crisis event. So just make sure that you can do as much of that work ahead of time. I mean, it can be fill in the blank. You don't have to do, but just make sure that you talk through these things with your teams so that you know what you need. And I'm a big believer in dark web pages. And here we have another one. We have a few more minutes, so if you've got questions, make sure that you tweet them in with the hashtag HigherEdLive or @HigherEdLive, and the guys that are running the back end of the tech will put them up on the screen for us so we can answer them. Here's a question that says, we only use social media on campus for broadcasting news stories and events. We're not really trying to start any conversations or anything because we don't have enough people to monitor all the channels. How should we use social media in a crisis? And I'll start off here just to say again, our thing is that if you're using social media well 365, when you have a crisis, this will be a lot easier for you to do. But it's going to be really hard for you as an institution if you're just broadcasting to have that value of advocates in a crisis, because really you may have some more people that will broadcast your messages for you, but they're might not come to your aid. For instance, if it's a reputation crisis and it isn't a logistical crisis. But I think that it's important that institutions understand that using social media for broadcast only is not effective anymore. It's especially not effective if you're trying to incorporate Crisis 2.0 strategies. Bill, I'll let you put your 2 cents worth in there about that.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to live social. I mean, there's just no other way about it. I've been in a lot of situations where I didn't have a lot of staff. Even at the University of Arkansas, when we were running our media operation there for athletics, we didn't have a ton of people. So it's not like we had the luxury that people will come up and say, oh, well, you were at a big school or you were at this school, you've got these resources. It's about deciding you're going to do it. You know, I talk a lot about the Facebook 5, which is you know, good formula for how you get a Facebook post to go a little bit viral and get repeated. But a lot of this has to be walking around campus and saying, hey, look, there's some pretty flowers. I bet that would make a nice picture for our Facebook page. Let me take that picture. Let me post it. You know, it became a piece of, it's currently our cover art on our Facebook page. Now, that's not because I planned it. Shoot, it would have taken longer if I'd planned it out and plotted it out and called the photographer. It's I just saw it and I took advantage of it. This is the point that I think a lot of us are trying to make about engaging with your communities, and that's your booster communities, your scholar support communities, your alumni, your potential students, your current students. You have to engage them. That's what the heart of all this tool is. And especially the digital natives, they expect one-on-one interaction. It's not a given. that they're going to respond to anything you broadcast. They'll sniff it out. They'll kind of just meh it away. You've got to engage, and the only way you're going to engage is by having a conversation.
Right. I was just checking the hashtag, Bill, for Higher Ed Live tonight. I noticed that there was a comment on here that you'll appreciate, where someone said it's refreshing to hear someone higher up in higher ed comms at Dr. BS who gets it when it comes to averting social media crises. Bill, do you find that people at your level in universities, are they getting it, or are they still, is there a lot of lag?
I think it depends on the individual. You know, I remember back in the early 90s, one of the most advanced people that I ran across was the commissioner of the Southeastern Conference, Roy Kramer. Now, here's a gentleman that had an outstanding career in coaching, an athletic director, and you know, he was in his late 60s running the SEC, and he would constantly walk in and pepper people with questions about, did you see this on the internet? Did you see this on a website? Did you see this online? And people would look at him like, Roy, what are you doing? He says, this is what you have to do to keep up. It's a mindset. It really is a mindset. You can't decide that you're not going to do some of these things because they are just a part of our lives today and a part of our students' lives. I kind of rewind back to where we started this evening. You know, in the 20th century, we all got fat and happy in the age of broadcast, in which we could talk one to many, and there were 3 networks, and you actually had to get up and turn the channels. You didn't have a remote.
Wow, Bill, you're old, man.
Yeah, I know. Well, and people will say, look, this is all so new. This is all so radical. No, it's not. There's nothing new in the world except the history we've forgotten. Harry Truman said it. It's my favorite quote. Because here's the thing. What we really have is an 18th century mode of communication. It's one-to-one. We used to write letters to each other. We didn't have radio stations to broadcast. Our entertainment was keeping up with our friends through the letters that passed among them. What's different now is scale. We are networked together by these computers, which allow us to talk to a massive group of folks here instead of just 2 people getting together and talking. But the dynamic's the same. If I, you know, sort of assume that for an hour I'm going to lecture you, you know, most of the folks watching are going to tune out after a while unless they're just, you know, completely enthralled with what I say or dependent upon me for a grade. You've got to sort of go back to that mindset. It is about you and that one person you're talking to. And that's not as time-consuming as you think. It's not going to force you to have to answer 10,000 questions today because 10,000 people will read your Facebook post and 0.1% will respond. But the other 99.99% that aren't responding are keenly watching how you answer those 1 or 2 people. You will inform in a broadcast old-school sense as you relate to that one person you're talking to.
Good thoughts, Bill. Great thoughts. We're going to wind it up here tonight. We're just about out of time. Just wanted to mention a couple of things. If you know people that wanted to hear but couldn't be here, just remember that all the Higher Ed Live programs are archived and available on the higheredlive.com site. And also I wanted to mention that next week at Ron Bronson is going to host Higher Ed Live with guest at Marley's Mom to talk about Higher Ed Solo. If you've never seen or heard of Higher Ed Solo, it's really cool. It's basically about one-man shops, so it'll be a great chat to have. And again, I want to thank Bill. It's been great to see you, even though it's via virtual, so to speak. And also thanks to the guys that put on the back end tonight. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you here again next week.